The few points I'm about to make is going to make some of you very uncomfortable, but it's about time we had this conversation. My name is Ifenwa Omesieta and I'm a pediatric nutritionist. If this is your first time, hi! If not, welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about something I've kind of been tiptoeing around on my Instagram page, but I'm officially ready to have that conversation with you. And it's about chewing food. Yes. The simple concept of chewing food is driving so many parents crazy, and today we're going to have that conversation. So stay tuned and let's get ready.
That means that extra.
Okay, so chewing is important. We can all agree on that, right? However, it's a skill that is learnt and not inbuilt. So what that means is that you actually have to teach your child how to chew. It's just like reading. There's this assumption that everybody is supposed to know how to do it, till you realize that that's not true and there are some people that actually cannot read. Another thing to also consider is that chewing involves multiple muscles. Like there are so many muscles that go into chewing. So what that means is that those muscles need to be exercised early and often, so on a regular basis. In my clinical experience, one of the issues I find is that a lot of parents make this assumption that chewing is something that just happens, right? And because of that, they're kind of waiting for it to happen, like you're waiting for a milestone. And then when you realize that there is a problem, it's already too late. However, not every issue around chewing is related to weaning properly or efficiently, and it also has very little to do with the skill itself. Let me explain. So, there's something called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, for short, AFRID. And AFRID actually has very little to do with the child's body and so much more around the anxiety of food. So this person has major anxiety issues around food, and it occurs in younger children under the age of 7. Now, AFRID is divided into there are three major types. There's medically complicated AFRID, there's sensory-related AFRID, and there's trauma-related AFRID. Now, medically complicated AFRID just means that the child has either had multiple surgeries or they faced with so many medical complications at a young age that is interfering with their appetite, affecting their ability to use their throat to swallow, and so many other things, right? So that one tends to be medically induced. Sensory-related AFRID actually has a lot to do with the child's anxiety around texture, color, taste, the feel of the food, and so many other aspects around your senses, the smell of the food as well. Then there is trauma-related AFRID. Now this one's a little dicey because it has a lot to do with either maybe the child had a horrible choking experience, had a bad experience with a particular kind of food or a particular texture, maybe they had, terrible diarrhea or something like that. That in itself is trauma-related AFRID, which would make a lot of sense. Now the one that is the most common is sensory-related AFRID, and we're going to spend some time talking about that right now. Okay, so as I mentioned, the most common is sensory-related AFRID. And really, in essence, it just means that this child has a fixated view or anxiety around colors, textures, smell of food, really just anything that has to do with the senses around food. And the most common symptoms that parents notice really early is that the child either doesn't want to swallow or doesn't want the food to touch their mouth, or they don't want to chew. So most of the time you find that the foods are semi-solid or have to be pureed or have to be really, really smooth. If not, they have somewhat of like a gagging reflex. Now, many medical professionals actually misdiagnose this disorder and they call it picky eating. And the reason for that is because most parents, when they experience it, the first place they run to is actually the pediatrician, which is not wrong. But if the pediatrician is not familiar with AFRID, they are going to misdiagnose you. And the reason for that is because there's actually not any physical tests that will be run that will show that there is actually an issue. Now, there may be some physiological tests, and that will be left for a specialist, but there are no physical tests that you actually run, because by all measures of standards, the child is usually fine, unless there's now nutritional deficiencies or the child has certain obvious lesions in their mouth and things like that. But most of the time, you never find anything. And that's why the next few steps I'm going to mention are really important for you to take note of. So the first step to this is that if you notice that your child is still not chewing by 24 months or by their second birthday, then it's time to actually see a pediatric nutritionist or a registered dietitian. Now, I love pediatricians and they do amazing work, but if they are not going to refer you to the right professional, the right clinician, then you're going to have to take matters into your own hands and seek private help. Now, during the consultation session with the pediatric nutritionist or the registered dietitian, they're going to ask you a series of questions, multiple questions related to your child's feeding history, their feeding habits, behavioral habits, dependent on the clinician, as well as also taking a record of all the kinds of foods that your child eats, and also asking you some physiological questions as well. Now, these questions are going to be heavily dependent on your response. So keep your responses as detailed as possible, as honest as possible, and lay everything on the table, all right? Because your responses is then going to determine where you'll be referred to. Yes, you will still be referred. Now, the nutritionist will either refer you to see a gastroenterologist, a feeding therapist, ask you to do sessions with an occupational therapist, or a behavioral therapist. Yes, it is a multidisciplinary team approach. There is no such thing as a one-man team when it comes to AFRID. AFRID is a more complicated issue, and sometimes you may even have to see a psychologist, a child psychologist as well. Now, again, as I mentioned, multidisciplinary approach. This just helps you to get the best results as soon as possible. Because believe me, AFRID can stay with a child till the child gets to 13. And I'm not even kidding, all right? So it's definitely something you definitely want to see someone for. Now, I know I haven't made it very clear whether every child has AFRID. Truth be told, parents who have children with feeding difficulties, severe feeding difficulties, you have tried everything within your power and it's not working. You've spoken with the nutritionist and the person makes that referral. That's usually when you would know. That's why the first step is going to see a nutritionist, because they will easily tell you whether it is AFRID or just tell you, okay, your child is picky and these are the issues, let me help you with that. Now, another pointer is that children who are usually on the autistic spectrum or have certain developmental delays that are not physiological. Physiological conditions would be people who have either things like cerebral palsy or genetic disorders or genetic diseases that actually impair the person's ability to swallow, or their metabolism or reflux in general, or their ability to regurgitate food in general. Those are people that we would then make that referral to. But if we find that it's a physiological issue, then the nutritionist or the dietitian will also let you know as well. All right. Now, the next step is just as important as the first three that I mentioned. It is going to require months, not days, not weeks, months of consistent and compliant behavior to therapy. So you can't do therapy for a few weeks and stop. You can't do therapy for 2 days and stop. You can't do therapy for 3 months and stop. It is consistent. The minimum I have seen in terms of patients that I've seen over the years is a minimum of 6 months. Now, some parents go off and on. You're just prolonging the process. Another thing is also make sure that you're vetting the therapist. Not every nutritionist is going to have a plethora of therapists that they can refer you to. If you're lucky, they will. In my case, I do have a couple that I work with, but depending on your location in the world, you might have to source for yourself. If your nutritionist is someone who is willing to walk with you on the journey, as I hope they would, for example, I always aim that my patients reach out to me, let me know, keep me updated, and we can work hand in hand together to be able to find the best solution. But believe me, I don't have all the answers. It's a multidisciplinary approach. All right, so I hope this makes sense and you've gotten a lot of insight on what AFRID is, some chewing difficulties children had, and just paint a clearer picture, because I feel like we're not having honest conversation with ourselves and we're kind of leaving a lot of things that involve children to chance. And believe me, in our parents' time, it was nothing like this. A lot of us just survived and managed. Some of us are still having difficulties. Some children got to 8, 9, 10 before they eventually started eating properly. And believe me, we don't live in such a safe world anymore where the environment is conducive to these things. You will find yourself struggling a lot more than our parents did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. All right. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been insightful and you've gotten a lot of information from this conversation. If you do feel like you want to have a conversation with me, please drop a comment down below on this video. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you can always get videos like these. And of course, if you feel like you want to speak with me one-on-one, I'm going to drop a consultation link in the description box just so that you can have easy access to it. I'm looking forward to speaking to some of you if this is an issue you're experiencing, and if you need more clarifications, I'll be in the comments. Till next time, bye.